The morning was quiet and still at Hever Castle, the Boleyn family's grand estate in Kent, when the news arrived. Mary Boleyn, the younger daughter of Sir Thomas Boleyn, had been recalled from France. Her father, a man known for his ambition and political cunning, had decided that his daughter was no longer safe in the French court. The reasons for her recall were unclear, but the whispers that followed her were not. Some said she had been a victim of the dangers that lurked in the shadows of the French court, while others whispered of her own indiscretions. Mary's journey back to England was long and fraught with tension. She had left England as a young and innocent girl, sent to the French court to learn the ways of the nobility and to gain the polish that would make her a suitable match for a powerful husband. But the court of France, with its intrigue and its many dangers, had changed her. She had been placed in the household of Queen Claude of France, where the competition for the king's favor was fierce. Mary, along with her sister Anne, had been among the select few chosen to serve the young queen, a position that should have been one of honor and prestige, but the reality was far different. King Francis I, known for his charm and his many conquests, had a reputation for seeking out the most beautiful and vulnerable women at his court. Mary, with her striking looks and her gentle demeanor, had not gone unnoticed. While Anne had managed to fend off the king's advances, Mary had not been as successful. The rumors that followed her were not kind. She was described by some as a great and infamous whore, a reputation that would follow her for the rest of her life. Sir Thomas, upon learning of the situation, acted swiftly. He could not risk his daughter's reputation any longer, for it could jeopardize her future, and by extension, the family's ambition. He called her home, determined to find her a suitable marriage in England. His timing was impeccable, as the rumors of her indiscretions had not yet reached the English court. He used his influence to secure a place for Mary in the household of Queen Catherine of Aragon, a woman known for her strict and moral character. It was a risky move, but Sir Thomas was a man who knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of the court. Mary's arrival at the English court was met with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Queen Catherine, who had recently endured the humiliation of her husband's infidelity with Elizabeth Blount, was unlikely to welcome another potential source of temptation. But Sir Thomas, a skilled diplomat, managed to persuade the Queen to accept his daughter. Whether it was through his own charms or the influence of his wife, Elizabeth, who had been a trusted member of the Queen's circle, Mary found herself in a position of favor. By February 1520, Mary was well established in the Queen's household and was even married to William Carey, a rising star in the King's privy chamber. The King himself attended their wedding, a sign of his favor and a hint of things to come. For Mary's life was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would see her rise from a lady in waiting to the mistress of the most powerful man in England. The years that followed were marked by courtly intrigue, lavish entertainments, and the growing tension between Mary and her sister Anne. While Mary found herself in the king's favor, Anne was watching and learning, preparing for her own turn in the spotlight. The court was a place where loyalty was rare, and danger lurked around every corner. Mary, with her beauty and her charm, had caught the eye of King Henry VIII, and her life would never be the same again. Mary Boleyn's life took a dramatic turn after her husband, William Stafford's death, in July 1543. The legal complications surrounding her estate were complex. Lands held jointly with William remained with him, but those in Mary's name alone reverted to the crown. This included the wardship of her children, Henry and Catherine, who were 17 and 15 at the time. Catherine might have already been married to Sir Francis Knollys, as her wardship is not mentioned in the records. Henry, however, was taken into the royal household and appears there in 1545, suggesting his estates were likely released to him around that time. William Stafford, now a widower, emerged as a Protestant after Henry VIII's death and supported the policies of the new protector, the Duke of Somerset. By then, he had gained a reputation as a soldier, serving in the royal household in 1544, and participating in a punitive raid in Scotland in 1545. For his service, he was knighted on September 23, 1545. Somerset secured him a place in the 1547 Parliament, where he represented the borough of Hastings, despite having no known connection to the town. From 1548 to 1553, he served as standard-bearer of the gentlemen pensioners, a prestigious position at court. Despite this, he continued to sell lands, and in 1545, he was released from a 200-mark debt to the crown. indicating both his financial struggles and the favor he was gaining. Between 1545 and 1550, William married again, this time to Dorothy, the daughter of Henry Stafford, 1st Lord Stafford, and thus a distant relative. Dorothy, whose mother was Ursula Pole, a granddaughter of George, Duke of Clarence, gave William 3 sons, who, through their lineage, had a distant claim to the throne. Mary had been pregnant in 1534, but the child presumably died, and she may have been too old to conceive again. In 1551, William accompanied the Marquis of Northampton to France to bestow the Order of the Garter on King Henry. He was paid £900 for his services in 1554, which likely dated back to before July 1553. William's comfort with the restored Catholicism of Mary I's reign was short-lived. Fearing persecution, he left England without permission in early 1555 and settled in Geneva with his household. He quickly became involved in the city's politics and was attacked and nearly killed during a political uprising in May 1555. As a result, he was allowed to carry a sword for protection. William and his household joined the English congregation in Geneva on November 1, 1555, and his son John, with John Calvin as his godfather, was baptized there on January 4, 1556. William had agents in England to manage his lands and ensure he received his revenues while in exile. Despite losing his position as standard-bearer at the start of Mary I's reign, he avoided confiscation of his property when a government bill targeting exiles failed in November 1555. The Privy Council attempted to prevent money from reaching William in May 1556, but he died on May 5, 1556. After a dispute with his brother over the custody of young John, Dorothy moved to Basel with the child, becoming a burgher of the city on November 3, 1557. She returned to England in January 1559, and served as Elizabeth I's Mistress of the Robes until her death in 1607, at an advanced age. Mary Boleyn's personality remains somewhat enigmatic. Her surviving letters, mostly business-related, suggest she was guided more by emotion than intellect. Her lack of scholarly or artistic accomplishments, unlike the refined French court, may have contributed to Henry VIII's loss of interest in her by the summer of 1525. After her marriage to Henry VIII, she relied on the goodwill of Thomas Cromwell and the tolerance of the Duke of Norfolk for support. Her skills in managing men and money are unclear, and William's career only began to thrive after her death. In the context of the Boleyn family story, Mary is important as a foil to her sister Anne, and as a means of transmitting the Boleyn lineage into the 17th century and beyond. Anne Boleyn's journey began when her father, Sir Thomas Boleyn, secured her a place as one of the 18 filles d'honneur at the court of Margaret of Austria in the Low Countries in 1513. At 12, Anne was one of the youngest attendants, but the regent's first impression was favorable. Anne's early letters to her father, though written in imperfect French, show her eagerness to learn and impress. Margaret's court was a model of Burgundian tradition, where Anne learned courtly dances, music, and the art of flirtation. Margaret, a strict chaperone, ensured that the games of courtly love were conducted according to strict conventions. Anne also had the opportunity to serve as an interpreter during Henry VIII's campaign in 1513, where she met her father. In 1514, Henry's sister Mary was to marry Charles of Ghent, but the plans changed, and she was instead married to Louis XII of France. Sir Thomas Boleyn, concerned about the political climate, transferred Anne to the French court to serve the new Queen of France. Anne joined her sister Mary in Paris before Mary's coronation in November 1514. Anne's time in France, particularly in the service of Queen Claude, was formative. She observed the courtly life and the realpolitik of courtly love, especially during the brief reign of Mary Tudor and her secret marriage to Charles Brandon. Anne's 7 years in the French court, under the gentle and diplomatic Queen Claude, taught her the intricacies of court life and diplomacy. She learned to navigate the political and social landscape with grace and wit, skills that would serve her well in her future ambitions at the English court. Anne Boleyn's years at the French court were a mix of service and anticipation. She served Queen Claude, who was often pregnant, which made the experience quite different from serving the elegant and widowed Margaret of Austria. Living in the French court, Anne was likely always present, with few breaks, as she had no family in France. The court often moved between Amboise and Blois, and life there was less public than it had been in the Netherlands. Despite the court's smaller scale, Francis I visited frequently, bringing his attendants, which meant that Anne was not entirely free from courtly attention. However, the grand entertainments and courtly love that characterized other courts were less common. One of the most significant events during Anne's time in France was the Field of Cloth of Gold, a grand meeting between the English and French courts in 1520. Anne, now a poised and self-assured young woman, was among the Queen's ladies and played a role in the elaborate festivities. The event was a showcase of wealth and power, with tournaments, banquets, and dancing. The ladies, including Anne, were part of a beauty competition between the English and French courts, though Anne herself did not stand out in the descriptions of the time. The meeting was a chance for her father, Sir Thomas Boleyn, to introduce her to Henry VIII, and it may have been a rare family reunion for the Boleyns. While in France, Anne also made the acquaintance of Margaret of Angoulême, the sister of Francis I. Whether they developed a close friendship is uncertain, but Margaret was aware of Anne and may have shown her some favor. Anne remained in Claude's household until late 1521, when her father decided to bring her home. The reason for her recall was partly due to the deteriorating relationship between England and France. Sir Thomas was aware of the Treaty of Bruges, which committed England to war with France, making the French court an increasingly uncomfortable place for his daughter. Another reason for Anne's recall was a potential marriage arrangement. In 1515, the Earl of Ormond died, leaving his estate to his daughters, one of whom was Anne's grandmother, Margaret Boleyn. This led to a legal dispute over the Irish lands, with Piers Butler, the heir male, claiming the title. To resolve the conflict, it was proposed that Anne marry James Butler, Piers' son and heir. Anne, however, refused to marry someone she had never met, which may have been an additional reason for her return to England in 1522. Upon her return, Anne joined her sister Mary in the household of Queen Catherine of Aragon. Her French manners and courtly skills made an immediate impression at the English court. One of her first public appearances was at York Place in March 1522, where she participated in a Burgundian entertainment known as the Siege of the Château Vert. Anne played the role of Perseverance, one of the female defenders of the chateau, in a lavish and symbolic performance. Despite the event's grandeur, there is little evidence that Anne made a particular impact, and her appearance is not well documented. Anne's beauty was often remarked upon, particularly her dark eyes, though she was not considered a conventional beauty. She was tall, with dark hair and an oval face, and her attractiveness soon drew admirers. One of these admirers was Sir Thomas Wyatt, a poet and diplomat, who wrote cryptically about his infatuation with her. However, the extent of their relationship is debated, and it likely occurred between 1522 and 1525. Another significant relationship was with Henry Percy, the son of the Earl of Northumberland. Percy became infatuated with Anne while they were both at court, and they planned to marry. However, their plans were thwarted by several obstacles. Sir Thomas Boleyn was still considering the Butler marriage, and Percy was betrothed to Mary Talbot. Cardinal Wolsey, who was aware of the Talbot commitment, intervened, and Percy was forced to break off his engagement with Anne. He went on to marry Mary Talbot in 1525, and the marriage was unhappy. These early experiences at court, including her relationships with Wyatt and Percy, shaped Anne's life and her future at the English court. Despite the setbacks, Anne's charm and intelligence continued to make her a notable figure, and her path to becoming Queen of England was just beginning. Anne Boleyn had always been a woman of ambition, and securing a powerful marriage was her ultimate goal. But despite her charm and wit, she had yet to find a suitable match. James Butler, while a potential suitor, did not appeal to her, and Henry Percy, the man she truly favored, was out of reach due to the powerful forces that opposed their union. Even a flirtatious relationship with Thomas Wyatt, if it existed, couldn't replace the desire for a stable marriage. Anne was not the typical noblewoman of her time. She was intelligent, free-spirited, and unafraid to speak her mind. These qualities, while admirable, made her less appealing to the average Tudor nobleman, who preferred a docile and faithful wife. However, one man was captivated by Anne's unique qualities, King Henry VIII. The exact moment Henry began to show interest in Anne is a matter of speculation, but it's believed that it started as a typical courtly love affair. Henry, who had engaged in such affairs before, found Anne different. Her wit and charm were unlike anything he had experienced, and he ended his relationship with her sister Mary to focus his attention on Anne. This was a significant shift, as it marked the beginning of a more serious pursuit. By the summer of 1525, Henry's interest in Anne had deepened. He had grown tired of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, and by 1524 he had likely stopped sleeping with her. In the summer of 1525, he formally ended his relationship with Mary Boleyn, leaving him without a regular partner. This period of celibacy may have intensified his feelings for Anne. The development of Henry's feelings for Anne can be traced through a series of undated letters. In one letter, Henry sent Anne a buck he had hunted, chiding her for not replying to his previous letters. Another letter, written a year later, expressed his deep affection and his desire to make her his only mistress. Anne, however, played hard to get, responding with coy professions of chastity. This only heightened Henry's interest, and he began to court her more seriously. By the summer of 1527, Henry's feelings had reached a critical point. He decided to pursue a more significant commitment and offered Anne marriage. This was a bold move, as it meant he would have to seek an annulment of his marriage to Catherine. Anne, recognizing the gravity of the situation, responded by sending Henry a symbolic gift, a small model ship with a woman on board and a pendant diamond. The ship, a symbol of protection, clearly indicated her acceptance of his proposal. Henry was overjoyed and reassured Anne of his devotion, expressing his desire to be with her both in heart and body. He also urged her to return to court earlier than planned, as he missed her company. Meanwhile, the political landscape was changing. The Pope, Clement VII, was held captive in the Castel Sant'Angelo, and Cardinal Wolsey, seeing an opportunity, set off for France to try to secure a favorable outcome for Henry's annulment case. However, Wolsey was unaware of Henry's commitment to Anne, suggesting that their relationship was still kept secret. The legal and political challenges ahead were significant. Henry's case for annulment was based on the argument that his marriage to Catherine was invalid because it violated the biblical law in the book of Leviticus. This argument was not strong enough to overcome the political and religious opposition, particularly from the Emperor Charles V, who was Catherine's nephew. Despite this, Henry and Anne waited, hoping for a resolution that would allow them to marry and secure their future together. During this waiting period, Anne remained a symbol of the growing tension at court. While Catherine continued to preside over public events, Anne was given lodgings close to the king, creating a complex and delicate situation. Henry's public stance was that his conscience was troubled by his marriage, and he sought the truth through legal and ecclesiastical means. However, the widespread support for Catherine among the nobility and the public made the situation increasingly difficult. In November 1528, Henry addressed a gathering of nobles and citizens at Bridewell Palace, declaring his intention to resolve his marital issues. He claimed that he sought only the truth and the peace of his conscience, but the response was not what he had hoped for. The road to their union was long and fraught with obstacles, but Henry and Anne were determined to see it through. The year 1528 was a pivotal one for Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. By now, Anne, though often away from court, was a constant presence in the king's mind. She was determined that Henry should continue his quest for an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Anne's influence was evident as she briefed ambassadors, such as Stephen Gardiner and Edward Fox, who were sent to Rome in February 1528. Despite her impatience, Henry tried to reassure her, writing sweetly and urging her to be patient, promising that their plans would come to fruition. However, by the end of 1528, Henry's resolve was wavering. Frustrated by the lack of progress and the complexities of Roman politics, he considered giving up and proposing that Anne become his mistress, but Anne's tough and determined nature prevailed. She insisted that Henry persevere, and her efforts paid off. By December 1528, she was back at court, lodged near the king, and given her own suite at Greenwich Palace for the Christmas celebrations. Despite this, Catherine still held a prominent place at court. Meanwhile, Anne's father, Sir Thomas Boleyn, had been elevated to Viscount Rochford in 1525. His position at court was closely tied to the evolving relationship between Henry and Anne. As Anne's influence grew, her father's status also rose. This shift in the Boleyn family's fortunes was reflected in the French influence at the English court, with Francis I of France increasingly seeking to align with England against the Emperor Charles V. The Duke of Norfolk and Lord Rochford received French pensions, and the king's councils were increasingly pro-French. Wolsey, the powerful cardinal, found himself increasingly marginalized. Henry's lavish parties at Newhall, where Lord Rochford was a favored guest, and the king's growing reliance on the advice of nobles like Norfolk and Suffolk, signaled a shift in power. When Wolsey returned from France in September 1528, he found the king spending more time with Anne and his influence waning. Wolsey's attempts to mediate between France and the Holy Roman Empire were complicated by Henry's personal interests, particularly his desire for an annulment. In 1528, the international situation was tense. The League of Cognac, formed to challenge Charles V's dominance in Italy, saw England offer financial support but not direct involvement. The sacking of Rome by a mutinous imperial army in May 1527 further complicated matters, and Wolsey's efforts to secure a papal annulment for Henry were hindered by the Pope's captivity. Domestically, the year was marked by the outbreak of the sweating sickness, which claimed the lives of several courtiers, including William Carey and Sir William Compton. Anne and her father were among those who fell ill but recovered. Anne's frequent absences from court were partly due to her health, but also served to maintain her position. Henry's efforts to secure an annulment continued, and in November 1528, he presented his case to a gathering of notables. The lukewarm response left him disheartened, but the arrival of Cardinal Campeggio in October brought a glimmer of hope. Campeggio, however, was under strict instructions to delay the proceedings, and despite his admiration for Henry's understanding of the issues, he refused to expedite the process. By the spring of 1529, Henry's impatience was reaching a boiling point. The discovery of a different version of the papal brief in Spain, which favored Catherine, forced Henry to confront the issue of papal authority directly. He tried to argue that the Spanish version was a forgery, but this did little to sway Pope Clement VII, who was under considerable pressure from Charles V. The Legatine Court, convened to hear the annulment case, opened on 18 June 1529. Catherine appeared in person, challenging the court's authority and appealing to Rome. Despite initial progress, the court was soon bogged down by technicalities, and on 13 July, Clement VII, under imperial pressure, revoked the case to Rome. This effectively ended the proceedings in England, leaving Henry no choice but to seek a new path. The year 1529 marked a turning point for Henry and Anne. With the annulment process stalled, Henry's frustration grew, and the Boleyns' influence at court solidified. The stage was set for the dramatic events that would follow, as Henry's determination to marry Anne led him to break with the Roman Catholic Church and establish the Church of England. The Boleyns, once mere courtiers, were now at the center of a political and religious revolution that would reshape England forever.